Alright guys, I would say I've thoroughly dug a deep enough hole into the Saturn library, so let's go ahead and count down what my favorites were as I was exploring the console this month. Kicking things off is going to be Kenos Enemy Zero. This is probably the best horror game on the Sega Saturn, and it's one of those games that I both really love and I really hate. I love the atmosphere of this game. I love the intensity of the combat, but at the same time, I also hate the game for those very same reasons. Like, the whole deal with how you take out the enemies in this game is very complex, and while it does make for a very tense horror experience, it does also make the game very unfriendly to newcomers, and even people who have played this game several times are likely to struggle with it as well. But really, you can't put a price on how scary this game can be, especially towards the end of the game where you're having to deal with God knows how many aliens at once. On top of that, it's got great graphics and represents probably Kenji Eno's best work. One of the finest games on the console for sure. At number 9, we have King of Fighters 95. Now, there are tons of great fighting games on the Sega Saturn. I probably could have filled out the vast majority of the list with fighting games, really. But I decided to keep it to a minimum as best as possible, but I couldn't justify not putting King of Fighters 95 on here. Like, the presentation is stellar, the music is great, and the fighting is just polished to a mere gleam. SNK may not have ever reached the same mainstream success that Street Fighter did, but there's no denying that they made some absolutely outstanding fighting games. And with the custom team system that's in place with this one, there's so many different possibilities for combinations that you can come up with this one. So yeah, another favorite on the console, one I highly recommend. And while we're on the subject of fighting games, I felt the need that I needed to narrow my choice for the best Capcom fighter down to just one. And ultimately, what I settled on was X-Men vs. Street Fighter. Now, one could argue that Marvel Superheroes and Marvel vs. Capcom, which is not on the Saturn, by the way, I apologize for that screw-up, or Marvel vs. Capcom 2 are better. But I gotta be honest, there's something about this initial crossover that just works for me. I feel like the thing is with this game, like with Marvel vs. Capcom and eventually Marvel vs. Capcom 2, like things got so convoluted in regards to the balancing with the massive rosters and everything that it just sort of became a mess. Now, that's not to say that those games can't be an absolute blast, but I don't know, there's something humble about this first crossover that just appeals to me. Top it off with some amazing graphics, some incredibly fluid gameplay, and really the start of Capcom's Versus series in general. And you got yourself one that should never be passed up under any circumstances. I really wish they would re-release this game on modern hardware, but due to the fact that, Disney is very stingy with licensing out the Marvel IP to anyone who can't name their price, I doubt that's ever going to happen. At number 7, I think it is. Number 7? Yeah, number 7 we have Policenauts. So, of all the games I was going to play for this month, I was most excited to play Policenauts just because it was made by Hideo Kojima. I'm a huge fan of his work, and it was bittersweet to finally get to play this. The story, the atmosphere, as well as just the depiction of a near-future setting is just masterfully done, and I feel it represents some of Hideo Kojima's finest work in regards to storytelling. Now, from a gameplay perspective, I do feel it is really shallow. There isn't much to it other than just going through the dialogue trees and occasionally clicking on enemies to shoot them. But this is something that you play primarily for the story as opposed to the gameplay, so I'm willing to cut some slack. However, that only means it's getting as high as number 7 on my list, so sorry Kojima, but you need a little more gameplay than this, which thankfully you would deliver with the Metal Gear Solid series. While we're on the subject of great sci-fi games. We got Radiant Silvergun, which is sort of the inverse of Policenauts in that regard. Whereas Policenauts really hangs its hat on its story and atmosphere, this game is more about balls-to-the-walls action in regards to its gameplay. The very definition of a bullet hell shooter. The game also sets itself apart from other games in the genre with a very complex weapon system, where you have 6 different ones to use, each with their own specific uses in combat. Being able to juggle all the weapons to conquer the game's challenges is just so satisfying, and though it'll kick your ass, you'll always come back for more. One of the best games Treasure has ever made, without a doubt. Speaking of Treasure, we also have their probably their more famous game on the Saturn, which is Guardian Heroes. A combination of beat 'em up, RPG, and choose your own adventure. Like it's just one of the most complete beat 'em ups I've ever played. Like every character feels distinct, and when you play with friends, everyone has their own roles in battle, which is really cool. The graphics are great. I mean, just look at the animation here. And the choose your own adventure aspect of it is actually done really well, because while you still will get the full story if you play through it initially, you'll get more detail if you go through the game again and go through on a different path. So there is lots of reason to play through this game multiple times. So once again, another one of Treasure's best, I would say. But then again, I don't think these guys have ever made a bad game now that I think about it. And of course, I don't think any Sega Saturn list would be complete without Nights into Dreams. A lot of you probably expected this to be number 1, and it definitely was one of my first choices, but I put it pretty low on the list, all things considered. And that's primarily because while Nights is really good, I just can't ignore how short it is. But from a gameplay perspective, the sense of flight that you get in this game is really good, and it's just so satisfying to control. The art style is great, the way it tells its story is beautiful, the music is wonderful, and it's got some of the best graphics on the Saturn, hands down. Like, man, I really wish that Sonic Team had put this effort into a Sonic game. I mean, I loved Nights, but like, the Sega Saturn just simply didn't need this game at the time. I'm glad it got made, but I would have preferred if, Sonic had gotten made before they had done this. That should have been priority before they were allowed to experiment. Still, Nights into Dreams, still an excellent game, and debatably the best game on the Saturn, though there's still a few more that I would put above it. And one such game would be Power Slave. Outside of the fact that it's just a really competent Doom clone, it also sets itself apart due to its focus on exploration. This is actually a 3D Metroidvania game. As you play through the game, you won't just get new weapons, but you'll also get new abilities as well that you can use to further progress your way into the levels. And that is just a really cool concept for a game like this. Like, I didn't think anyone would try something like this until Metroid Prime, but, it's great, and it actually does work with how the game is designed with its Egyptian theming and everything. And it's just a lot of fun to blow away enemies with the weapons in this game. The game is also available on PC, where it is just a straight Doom clone, and there is also an HD version of it as well. And while I do recommend that, considering that this is the only exclusive game for the Sega Saturn, well, it's not exclusive to the Saturn, only real first-person shooter on the Sega Saturn, I felt the need to include it this year. And the sleeper on the list, I was not expecting to like this game as much as I did, but man, Dragon Force is just brilliant, dude. So what this is a combination of an RPG and an RTS game, and not in the way you would think. Essentially how this game works is, like, for the battle system, that basically is an RTS, but you command your troops in the manner you would play an RPG by selecting how you want them attack and all that stuff. And that is just brilliant game design to me, because you can't get the same complexity that you need to properly play a RTS on a controller, especially the Saturn's controller. So rather than attempt to do that, they instead chose to simplify the RTS interface, but then compensate with the complexity of an RPG, and that just works wonders for the game. It just functions beautifully, and it's an impressive showpiece for what the Saturn can do too. I mean, look at how many character models are on the screen. Look at how detailed they are. I mean, this is a really impressive game. This is something that I would expect to be made today by an indie developer, just so they can get that retro brownie points, but also really show off their programming chops too. So yeah, this is another game that I wish would be more widely released because it is a great game on all fronts. But of course, I'm sure you guys all know what game I think is the best game on the Saturn, and that is Panzer Dragoon Saga. Okay, so I have been dying to go more in depth with this game since I talked about it at the beginning of the month. So what is it about this game that works so well? So first of all, the story is really interesting. Like, ever since I finished the first Panzer Dragoon game, I wanted more of the world. And though I got more with Panzer Dragoon 2, I didn't get anywhere near as much detail about the world as I did when I played this game. You get to see how people live in the world, the culture, how the politics of everything works. It's just fantastic, and like, the characters are great. It's just a fantastic story on all fronts. The graphics are really good, though it can appear to be unimpressive at times. Like, as you play through the game, the enemies get bigger, more complex. You really do see that this game is pushing the console to its absolute limits. Music is fantastic, but what really cements it as a gaming masterpiece for me is the gameplay. Outside of the fact that the combat system is really interesting and that you need to think about your positioning as opposed to just thinking about what attacks you're choosing. You also need to consider your special gauge, your positioning when attacking, your position to avoid enemy attacks. And like, what's great about it is that the pacing behind it is just beautiful. Right from the start of the game, you're fighting giant monsters, so right off the bat you feel powerful. Now compare that to something like your typical RPG. For the entirety of the first half of the game, you're typically fighting the weakest enemies possible, and that can be really boring at times. But with Panzer Dragoon, you're instantly fighting giant monsters, and they only get bigger as the game goes on, so imagine the sheer power you feel in that. In addition to that, you never have to grind in the game. You level up just as naturally as you feel you should. It's just... man, I could go on and on about Panzer Dragoon Saga. I really need to play this game for the live stream at some point, and I really need to record footage of it so that I can play, do a proper review of it, because I would like to go more in depth with this one. But yeah, Panzer Dragoon Saga, undeniably the best game I played this month, and I look forward to playing it again in the future. And that pretty much does it for the Sega Saturn. I gotta be honest, I had a lot of fun doing this. Though there are definitely some games that didn't impress. There were definitely lots that really did stick with me and are probably going to become classics for me as the years go by. Panzer Dragoon Saga is obviously going to be a big phone for me. Dragon Force is another interesting piece of game design. Power Slave, Knights is always going to be a classic. Same thing with Policenauts. Like, there really is a lot on the Sega Saturn that was worth looking into, and I'm glad that I finally got to explore the vast majority of the console. And I hope that you guys found something this month that you want to give a try. Again, while it is pricey to get a console and have it modified, it is worth every penny of it. I mean, like, you pay half of what you would have to pay for a copy of Panzer Dragoon Saga, if that tells you anything about it. And if there's any game that I didn't cover this month, please leave it in the comments of any of the videos for the retrospective, because I am always looking for new games to play, and I'm curious if there are any more underrated gems for the console I missed. But anyway, that's going to do it for this retrospective, guys. Thanks for sticking with me, and we'll be back to our regularly scheduled program next week. Anyway, I hope you guys have a fantastic night. Take care.